On July 4th, independence becomes written fact. Within days, copies travel by horseback throughout the colonies. No one had set out to create a war of independence, yet they had delivered one.
In the town squares all over the country, church bells were ringing and people were huzzahing. The crowd was applauding. People really did believe the birthday of a new world is at hand.
These united colonies are, and of right ought to be, free and independent states, absolved from all allegiance to the British Crown. All political connection between them and the state of Great Britain is and ought to be totally dissolved.
Back in Manhattan, the general is losing his famous cool. As he waits, he guesses and second guesses every plan and every defense. He too is about to face the biggest battle of his life, and it will not be on his terms. It is the British who are running this show. Late August, Long Island, D-Day. On a warm August morning, Howe moves his army. More than 15,000 British soldiers now march toward the American positions. For the first time in the brand new War of Independence, the British will test the strength of the American army head on. The British attacked first, with 2 columns taking the Continentals in a frontal assault. The 2 sides face each other in massive lines, often a mere 100 yards apart. What they don't know is that they are fighting a decoy. The bulk of Howe's army is actually a third flank, marching out and around the American forces. Washington has not prepared for this. By 10 a.m., the British break through the rear ranks and devastate the lines of the Continental Army.
The worst possible thing that can happen in those situations is to have a complete rupturing of your line, a complete break in which men panic and everybody flees basically for themselves.
The army straggles back, minus the 300 dead and 1,000 captured. George Washington watches in shock. His army had not withstood the battle. He had failed, and the danger is far from over. At Brooklyn Heights, the army is trapped on all sides. The British Navy commands the waterways to the west. From the east and south, Howe's army closes in on the shattered Continental defenses. All looks lost, but the end would not come just yet. In a last effort to save his army, Washington orders an immediate retreat to start at nightfall. Under the cover of darkness, the army begins to move, stealthily, using every ferry and fishing boat available to them. All through the night, soldiers are ferried across a narrow slip between Brooklyn and Manhattan. They soon run out of time, but they get one final providence. As morning breaks, a strange and eerie fog sets in over New York Harbor, engulfing the area in a near blackout. It is their salvation. The British see and hear nothing.
I could scarcely discern a man at 6-yard distance. In the history of warfare, I do not recollect a more fortunate retreat. Benjamin Talmadge, Continental Officer.
When the fog lifts, the British are met with an empty camp. The Continental Army, just hours before on the verge of defeat, has vanished overnight. The dream of a new world, Thomas Paine's vision, seems more remote with each step. Across America, spirits are depleted. Many soldiers up and leave the army. Others, like Joseph Hodgkins, face the choice: stay and fight, or return to their homes, perhaps as British subjects evermore.
My dear Joseph, I hope if we live to see this campaign out, we shall have the happiness of living together. It will trouble me very much if you should engage again. Your most affectionate companion until death, Sarah.
Hodgkins will stay and retreat with the remains of the army toward an uncertain future for himself, for the army, and for the cause of independence. The revolution will go on, but it is about to enter its darkest days. September 1776, New York. The rebel army is in retreat, pursued by the British up the Isle of Manhattan. In battle after battle, the colonial army is sent running, overwhelmed by the British forces and their superior power. The two sides engage at Kips Bay, then up Manhattan at Harlem Heights, and again north in White Plains. Only one lone American outpost prevents the total loss of New York and control of the Hudson River. Fort Washington, a garrison named after His Excellency George Washington himself. And now it is under a massive attack. George Washington watches the terrifying scene from just across the Hudson River. His last hold on New York is fading fast. Nearly all of his officers had recommended abandoning it. Fort Washington was not built to defend itself against such a sizable British onslaught. The Continental soldiers prepare themselves for a last stand, but they are in no shape for heroics. A month of steady defeats have left them exhausted. And now, again, they are outnumbered, 3,000 of them against 8,000 royals. It was Washington's most trusted general, Nathaniel Greene, who had convinced the commander to defend the fort. Greene, a young and talented Rhode Island officer, had, over time, become Washington's most trusted confidant. But this time, following his advice is a disastrous error in judgment for the rebel leader.
Nathaniel Greene opines that he can hold that fort with the men he has available to him, and he recommends that course of action to Washington. Washington trusts this very capable and energetic subordinate, and Greene was wrong.
The British army is unstoppable. Not only do they have the numbers, they put their big guns out in front. They unleash a fierce battalion of German fighters called the Hessians. The Hessians are unmistakable. From their armored helmets to their expertise with the bayonet, they are a near mythical vision from the old world. England has used foreigners for centuries to help fight their wars. But in America, the Hessians create a new specter. At once feared and hated, they are seen as outsiders in a conflict between brothers. They quickly gain a reputation as detested mercenaries.
The Hessians did not regard themselves as engaged in a civil war. And wherever the German mercenaries went, oftentimes there were allegations of all sorts of brutality.
Plucked from society's cast-offs and often pressed into service against their will, the Hessian soldiers are ruthlessly drilled into fighting machines. Their rewards, when they receive them, come in the form of pride and a fair share of whatever plunder they can get their hands on. In America, they sang songs about their chance for treasure.
Go with us to America. There will be enough for all. There will be silver, gold, and money. Everything that a man seeks in the world, all that a man seeks there, is in America.
Essentially, the Hessians operated according to a code that made sense in Germany, but was very different from anything that Americans had been familiar with.
On this day, the Hessians earn their worth. They lead the British in overwhelming Fort Washington in mere hours. By afternoon, the rebels lay down their weapons. Fort Washington is surrendered, and along with it, New York. The two sides now face each other up close. The King's army and their hired warriors get their first chance to gaze upon the faces of the exhausted rebel army they have pursued for months. It is a sight that leaves them shocked.
A great many of them were lads under 15 and old men, and few of them had the appearance of soldiers. Their odd figures frequently excited the laughter of our soldiers. Captain Frederick Mackenzie, British officer.
The King's men had been fighting a wretched army, a band of citizens with little training. As the smoke clears over the dead and wounded, an amazing sight takes both sides by surprise. A young woman sits by her dead husband's side, but she had not been an idle bystander. When John Corbin fell from wounds, Molly Corbin stepped up to the cannons, firing on the British with the rest of the patriots. The British quickly send Molly Corbin home. There, after the war, she will die in obscurity. But on this day, the rebels will not forget the woman who evoked their cause. If this war is to persist, every citizen, man, woman, and child, will be called upon.
I feel mad, vexed, sick, and sorry. This is a most terrible event. Its consequences are justly to be dreaded. General Nathaniel Greene.
Half the army is captured at Fort Washington. New York and control of the mighty Hudson falls squarely into British hands. Some begin to wonder whether the rebels can actually deliver an independent America.
I was never in such an unhappy, divided state since I was born. I am wearied to death. General George Washington.
I can only say that no lads ever showed greater activity in retreating than we have. Our soldiers are the best fellows in the world at this business. Colonel Samuel Webb, Continental Officer.
With retreat comes more recrimination, this time from within Washington's own ranks. General Charles Lee is among those who revel in Washington's failures and secretly scheme against him. In late November of 1776, Lee steps up his campaign for the commander's job. Like Washington, Lee is ambitious for glory, but their similarities end there. Where George Washington has a famous grace, Charles Lee has an infamous coarseness.